And she started trying frantically to take it back. And she said, you know, Connie, it's very difficult for me to talk to you because, she said, I've received a vision of light. Now, you have to understand they had this in common, this vision of light. She said, you should pray for wisdom that God would show you the hidden meaning of these Bible passages. I said, well, I'm not a theologian. I said, but I am a lawyer. And we were taught rules of construction that seemed just as appropriate for Bible study as for legal construction, and that's ambiguities are construed against the maker of the document, and words are to be given their plain meaning. I said, I don't know about you, but I have enough faith in our Maker to believe that He would not deliberately give us an ambiguous document. She said, are you familiar with the history of the Bible and how it was written and how contradictory it is? I said, yes, I'm familiar with the history of the Bible and how it was written, but I disagree with you on the contradictory aspect. I said, tell me, Phyllis, have you read the Bible all the way through? She said, no, I've carefully avoided doing that because it might tend to confuse me. I said, would you read Homer? Would you criticize Homer without having read it? Would you criticize Shakespeare without having read it? I said, let me tell you something. I said, I did read it all the way through. I said, I didn't find all those contradictions that people speak of. I said, when I read it all the way through, I said, I found myself understanding and in full agreement. And anyway, she was not enjoying her food any longer. I was enjoying mine. I wasn't going to let the devil, the Antichrist, or anything else interfere with a good meal. And she started gritting her teeth, and she says, it's just not right. It's not right. That book is simply too misleading. It shouldn't be allowed. And I looked over and I said, what's that, Phyllis? And she almost spit it out. She said, the Bible. I said, why on earth would you say a thing like that? And she spit it out again, and she said, the Antichrist is not the negative thing the Bible's made him out to be. I said, Phyllis, I said, I like you very much. Don't get caught on the wrong side of this one. And she said what is a common New Age theme, and it's their theme for the militant march they're now back on, there are no sides. Well, armed with the terminology New Age movement, I knew how to look it up. And I started collecting books, and I found the Bantam New Age series, and one of the first books I picked up was a book, and you might be familiar with this, Entropy, by Jeremy Rifkin. And another book was Voluntary Simplicity by Dwayne Elgin, whom the New Agers credit with being the modern theoretician of their sustainable development movement, DUANEELGIN. And those were both books I picked up both back in 1981, 1982 on the subject. And when I started perusing the books, and I found a book called New Age Politics by Mark Satin. And he listed 25 representative New Age groups, and they range from Amnesty International through zero population growth. And about everything in between you could think of, including World Goodwill, New York. His amended version of the book has 100 on the list. And as regards World Goodwill, he said they were preparing for the reappearance of the Christ. And Planetary Citizens was working in conjunction with them. And he described this new politics. It was neither left nor right, but center. And it was about doing things in different ways, thinking different ways, new patterns. And he wrote about a very broad spectrum of groups that were consciously collaborating. And my position was if they had the nerve to say it, I had the nerve to quote them. And so I started compiling these, and people got seminars and presentations of the informal type in my office. Professors came over from Wayne State University. I talked to an old professor of mine, and I said, I think this is a modern form of Nazism reborn. And he came over and he looked through the materials, and particularly Friends of the Earth, which was another group I'm sure you're familiar with. And another one was Dave Foreman with his, in fact, Dave Foreman wanted to reduce the Earth's population in some of the seminal writings I had to 75,000 and start over with a new nucleus. And I deprogrammed many New Agers, showing them those materials. And eventually I found a book called Running God's Plan by Foster Bailey. And he said one of the goals of their hierarchy was to have a unified Europe. He said, we tried this before, working through a disciple, using the Rhine River Valley and the inhabitants of that valley as a binding factor. That attempt was unsuccessful, but now another attempt is in full swing, namely the six-nation European Common Market. And you don't need to have been even an A student in history to have known who that disciple was. Adolf Hitler. And one day I found a book. My son had pulled out a newspaper column for me and said, Mom, this sounds like what you were talking about. It was an advertisement for a bookstore called New Age or Mayflower Books. And they said they were a sort of metaphysical clubhouse. And I went over there one night, and he said, we're closing. And I said, I'll pay cash, and I need some very specific things, and I'll be quick. I made a long trip to get here. And he said, well, all right. And I said, do you have anything on the New Age movement? And he looked at me like I was crazy, and he said, lady, the whole store. And he said, I said, do you have anything on Findhorn? Because I'd found a book called The Magic of Findhorn. And he corrected my pronunciation. He said, you mean Findhorn? He said, our Findhorn section is right down there. Our David Spangler section is right down there too. And so I bought a selection of those books, and a book by a very gossipy New Ager called Roland Gammon called Nirvana Now. And took them and analyzed them. And Reflections on the Christ by David Spangler you could carry into any Christian service, probably not attract a lot of attention, except they might think you were really pious. But inside that book, chapter called Lucifer, Christ, and God. And he said, Lucifer comes to bring us the final gift of wholeness. If we accept it, we are free, and he is free. And he said, the Luciferic initiation is a required entry point into the New Age. And I didn't leave it at that. I never take one source as my source. I eventually found the Alice Bailey books, and I was to read from another source that they had started life as Lucifer Publishing Company, which they adamantly denied for a time. But unfortunately for them, I now have 3 books in my personal library from them when they were Lucifer Publishing Company, 1922. And Alice Bailey had been a member of the Theosophical Society. And she and her husband, Foster Bailey, had in 1922, during the years that the Theosophists were promoting a man called Jiddu Krishnamurti as their new Messiah. And they started a work in New York City. And they then formed some worldwide works. And one of their strongest devotees was a man that you talked about, Maurice Strong. And I actually have a photograph, which I pulled down from the internet, of Maurice Strong at the Findhorn Foundation in Scotland, participating very devoutly in a group meditation for the reappearance of their new Christ. And I knew what a Marilyn Ferguson and the Aquarian Conspiracy had said something that I didn't think of until